Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In his posthumously published work, Offenses Against Oneself, Jeremy Bentham will point out a number of problems involved with severe punishments of same-sex relationships. In fact, centered on male-male relationships, because as he's going to point out shortly after that, there isn't a similar legal or even social or moral sanction applied to relationships between women as there is with men. And he's already pointed out, before we get to this section, some of the problems that have to do with it being rooted in antipathy, an antipathy that's more a matter of prejudice than any sort of real rational considerations, anything that's grounded in, as he would put it, the principle of utility, any sort of rights that are being violated, or, social utility that's being made problematic through mischief, as he's going to call it, which means harm. So he's going to point out three additional arguments against severe punishment, and indeed perhaps even against punishment at all. So the first one he actually will discuss, because he wants to give you, a good survey of what the views are out there, but he doesn't think it's a very good argument. And we could, think about similar cases in our own contemporary society. So the first problem with punishing, he says that the punishment is a means of putting men in mind to make an experiment of the practice, right? The investigation of the offense, male-male relationships, and the publicity of the punishment being the means of conveying the practice to the notice of a multitude of persons who otherwise would never have thought of any such thing. So you're punishing homosexual relationships or intercourse, and then people are like, oh, well, I never really thought about that, but maybe I'd like some of that, right? And in fact, in our own time, we have not so much, I think, with homosexuality, but in terms of extramarital sex in general, with abstinence-only sex education in middle school and high school, and also with drugs, particularly the DARE program, which is notorious for being counterproductive, because when you bring up drugs a lot and you're like, they're really, really fun, but you shouldn't do them because they're bad for you, kids often hear they're really, really fun. Same thing with the abstinence-only sex education, where you don't teach anything about contraceptives or, consequences other than you'll get somebody pregnant and your life will be ruined, or you'll get an STD, or, consent or anything like that. Kids learn about it and they're like, the sex thing is probably pretty good. So people become aware of the practice of same-sex relations in Bentham's discussion. And there's kind of a logic here. Because it's punished, well, it must be something you have to punish people because they like doing it. So if you're imposing severe punishment, it must be very pleasurable, so maybe I'd like to do that sort of thing, he's actually saying there. And so he says it overcomes the dread of so great a punishment. And he says That this must often happen is not to be denied, and insofar as it does happen and occasions the offense to be repeated, it weighs against the benefit of the punishment. This is a popular argument, he says, in his own time. He doesn't consider it to be a well-grounded argument. Why? Because on empirical grounds, what you need to do is look to see whether there is a greater amount going on when you're punishing it, people are becoming aware of it, than if you're not punishing it. And he says, well, in ancient times, it wasn't punished, unless it was like rape or something like that, and then it's a different category. And it was quite prevalent. You know, he's talking about the Greeks and the Romans in ancient society. In modern society, he says, in the very same countries since it has been punished, it has prevailed to a much lesser degree. So even in Italy and Greece, because it's being punished, people aren't doing it. And he says the mischief produced by the punishment can be lessened by making the trial and other proceedings private. So you just, don't punish publicly, you punish without any publicity, right? So that's not a particularly good reason. But there's two ones that he says are really big problems. So the first one, the danger of what he calls false and malicious prosecutions. So a false prosecution is when somebody hasn't actually committed a crime at all. And you are accusing them of that crime, and then you're going to, try to find them guilty. And once you do find them guilty, you're going to punish them. And a malicious prosecution would be, there's, some justification, but you're applying it because you want to hurt that person. Perhaps they're a political opponent, or you're taking revenge for some social slight that they engaged in. One way to test this is you're focused on them and you're not doing similar things with other people who could be equally, potentially victims of your prosecution, right? And one of the problems with this, as Bentham is going to say, is it's very easy, and he's talking about his own culture, to accuse somebody because you don't have the same standard of evidence of guilt. Why? He says, almost every other offense affords some particular test of guilt, the absence of which constitutes in any criterions of innocence. So, offenses against property, you show that the articles are missing or seen in an undue place, right? Somebody stole your ring, show that they've got your ring, right? Put them on camera, they're stealing your ring or something like that. Offenses against persons, marks of violence on the person. And he says, in these and in short, in all other or almost all other cases where the offense has really been committed, some circumstances will take place relative to the appearance of things, and so will be expected to be proved. And that's what you do legally, right? So, you can talk about rape committed on a virgin, even when it's been a married woman or a person of the same sex, marks of violence will be produced. But with consensual same-sex relations, you're not going to have those marks because there's no violence, there's no coercion. They are choosing it. And so he says no proof of such circumstances will be required. So whenever two men are together, a third person could allege himself to have seen them employing themselves without fear of having the truth of his story disproved. It's the witnesses, the false witnesses, word against the other people. And because of the social prejudice against homosexuality, they're probably not going to be believed. So it's difficult to prove your innocence, and that makes it very, liable for false, totally false, or malicious prosecutions to take place. And that's a problem for society from utilitarian points of view. The other problem is quite similar. It can be used as an instrument of what he calls extortion, what we would nowadays call blackmail, right? You say, I have evidence, or I'm going to just make a charge that you are engaged in same-sex relations with this person, and if you don't pay me money or do something else, could be, political favor, or, sign over your house to me or something like that, then I am going to make an accusation and the law will come down on your head. So that's another big problem as well. He says that it's frequently made use of as a means to extorting money. Why does it work? Fear of the severity of punishment, the legal punishment, and the moral antipathy or social antipathy, the social sanction, as Bentham calls it, to the offenses, right? So he says that it's the most terrible weapon a robber can take in hand. And a number of robberies one hears of, which probably are much fewer than the ones one does not hear of, are committed by these means. So he's talking again about blackmail. And he says that one of the problems is you might actually succeed legally, but the damage that is done to your reputation, to your social standing, is going to be pretty significant. Now, if you have a more permissive society where there isn't this social sanction at work, then maybe it wouldn't be quite a big problem. But he says, a man's innocence can never be his security. Knowing this, it must be an undaunted man to whom it can give confidence. A well-seasoned perjurer will finally have the advantage of him. Whether a man be thought to have actually been guilty of this practice or only be disposed to it. You don't even catch somebody in the act. You're like, he seems like the sort that would be engaging in this. His reputation suffers equal ruin. So these are three reasons why, punishing same-sex relationships should be viewed as problematic. One of them, the verdict is kind of out on that. Bentham doesn't think it's a very strong reason. A lot of people like it. Bentham thinks that these two, problem number 2, malicious or false prosecution, and problem number 3, instrument of extortion, are the really problematic reasons why we should, discontinue punishment and persecution of male same-sex relationships.